Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Be Freaking Awesome. I'm one of your hosts, Sammy Kinnison, here with Angela Belford. And today we're going to take you all on a journey through Angela's life timeline in some ways. This journey will not be chronological. If you have ADD, ADHD, probably will enjoy it a little bit more than those of you who are less neurodivergent than some of us. But in any case,
I think
uh,
that's like the disclaimer for the podcast.
true. So true. I really wanted to just take a moment, Angela, to talk with you about what brought you here to this moment. We are 1 week away from your second book releasing, and I feel like it's really important at different times in our life to pause and reflect on what brought us here and taking that moment to just sort of take stock in the things that have impacted us positively and negatively. I know sometimes within your process that you encourage people to go on, you encourage people to have gratitude for all the things that have brought us here. Some things maybe we're on an earlier step and we just need to acknowledge the things that brought us here rather than the gratitude that it brought us here. So, um,
I just want to clarify. I don't know that I always make people have gratitude for the terrible things that happen. It's a little bit nuanced, dollar
there
for
you
our
go.
dollar. I do encourage, I was going to say require, but I do direct people to feel gratitude for the feelings that come up or the emotions that come up, the sensations that come up when they're talking through the things that are happening in their life. That is the case. There's also a portion of the book that talks about integrating trauma, and there is an idea of like, because this terrible thing happened, we're not grateful for the terrible thing that happened, but because of it, you learned perseverance, you learned courage, you learned, different skills and abilities. And those skills and abilities have served you well. And so while the thing that happened to you is terrible, and there's no discounting that, and it felt bad, there were things that you developed that you get to own and be grateful for those skills, because while they were not unfortunate circumstances, it can serve you in your life. So I just want to clarify, I'm not going to always make people be grateful for their trauma. Be grateful for things you learned about yourself or skills that you had. And that is, according to Bessel van der Kolk, who is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, that is one of his techniques for helping you integrate trauma. So,
I like that. I also recently heard in course sort of that conversation of what are the good things you may have gained from trauma and different traumatic experiences. All of that credit goes to you. None of
yes,
that credit goes to an abuser or to the inflicting source. Like that is to your credit, to your character, to your grit and determination that those things have developed from there.
I love that. That's a great way to own your journey.
Right.
Yeah.
So, speaking of journeys, we're going
Yeah.
to kind of start. When did you decide in your first book? Here, let me actually take a step back. In your first book, you say the very first step is to make a decision to go on a journey to make things better. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
when did you decide?
What's funny is that I have had multiple people that are kind of, I would say, like in the industry professionals, and they say you can't make a decision. That's not the first step, because you got to be aware of it. And I say, well, you need to read the chapter where I say basically you have to make a decision to like review your life and look at it to see, are there things in my life that I don't appreciate or I don't like about my life? So it's not making a decision of where you're going. That's not the first step. Ironically, it's just, and it is that kind of pulling you into out of unawareness into awareness of saying, okay, let's look at this. Let's figure this out. So I would say that I kind of stumbled into my first decision because my freshman year, And if you read the book, I talk about this story.
College or high school?
Oh, yep. My freshman year of college. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the forgiveness work I had to do with 19-year-old me. And really it was 18-year-old me coming up to 19-year-old me. I would say that I was a stereotypical textbook survivor of a lot of childhood trauma. And I was working out my pain with sex and alcohol. I needed love, and the fastest method to connection was sex. And I was numbing my pain with alcohol. So very much binge drinking. And so a girlfriend of mine, and I'm excited because when this episode airs, I will have just gone and spent the weekend with her. And I haven't seen her in like over 20 years, maybe longer. It may have been longer than 20 years. I'll figure that out. But anyway, so a friend of mine, Becky, she gets back from counseling. There was a program on campus called CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services. And she gets back and says, "Hey, you have an appointment on Thursday." And I was like, "Uh-huh." And she goes, "I went to counseling. It was good. I've got some stuff to work out. So I scheduled an appointment for you," because you could do that in 1992. You could schedule an appointment for your friend. HIPAA wasn't a thing yet. Like, I don't even know. And so I guess the first decision was to listen to my friend, because I knew that she had my best interest at heart. I wasn't alone. She was going to counseling, so I wasn't going by myself. But I definitely don't think I had an awareness that I needed counseling. I just didn't have a clue, I don't think. And so I show up to my first appointment. It's very cool because I've heard people have hit or miss experiences with, college campus therapists, because it might be people that are in their, training program. I happened to have a therapist who was, we called it from in town. So she was a psychologist that was covering a maternity leave that semester. So she was very skilled, and probably the university typically wouldn't have paid somebody with the skills that she had. And I really wish I would know her name. I should probably go figure it out. But anyway, I show up at my first appointment. And she says, "So what brings you in?" I go, "My friend scheduled my appointment." And she goes, "Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? And we'll see." And so by the time I tell her a little bit about myself, she goes, "I think you should schedule a second appointment." And I don't actually remember what I told her. Probably because at that point I had not told anybody in probably 10 years. Let me think about this. No, that's not true. In probably 8 years. It had probably been 8 years since I had told anybody that my mom died. That just wasn't a part of my story. I certainly didn't tell anybody about anything that happened to my stepdad. My husband didn't know for the first 3 or 4 years we were married. My college roommate, one of my college roommates, she was a social work major, so she had a clue about what might have happened, but she did not know what happened to me. So it's so interesting now because I'm so open with my story. And so, like, I publish a book about my story. I talk a lot about the things that happened. But 18-year-old me didn't talk about my mom dying and being buried on my 8th birthday. Didn't talk about any of the other things. Didn't talk about living in 4 families. Like, I was trying so hard at that point to fit in. And I was delighted because for the first time in years, I did fit in, because everybody was broke college student. So in my small town high school, if you were poor, you couldn't be pretty. Like, it was like mutually exclusive. Nobody thought I was pretty that I went to high school with, because I was so poor. And funny, I dated a guy in high school for 2 or 3 years, but he was from another high school. So he knew me as a person, not as what my family was known for. Anyway, so that year, I mean, those 3 or 4 months, I think I only went for 3 or 4 months. I remember, like, my favorite episode. I think of things in episodes. My favorite appointment was when it was the Thursday before my birthday, and I was like, okay, so I haven't talked about the fact that my mom died 11 years ago. I've talked about this in 8 years, 9 years. And my counselor was like, okay, so what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I've got a party that I've got to go to. I'm probably going to get crap face drunk. Not what I said. And so she said, no, 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 you can make a different choice. You can choose a better option and you can make healthier choices. And the next Thursday I came in and she goes, well, how'd it go? And I said, I think we should celebrate that I know myself. Because my birthday was on Sunday and I woke up not at my house, which was pretty normal. I was a little sister of fraternity house, so I woke up at fraternity house. That wasn't that weird. And my friend, one of my dear friends, was like, hey, we sang you happy birthday at midnight last night. And I'm like, oh, what? Oh, thanks. I think that was also the day he's like, don't you want some bacon and eggs? And I'm like, no, I don't. Thank you. I'm good. I mean, I was blackout, completely did not remember anything. I have a couple of snippet memories of some pretty unfortunate things that happened that night. But anyway, there are still parts of my story that I'm just like, yeah, it is what it is. If somebody else is experiencing something, then I share that part. But you'll notice in both of my books, there aren't tons of stories about my college years. And a lot of that is still just having pretty recently working through the forgiveness of that, and just thinking pretty low, having a low opinion of those years, even though I have some just amazing friendships and some awesome skill sets. Talk about like, I don't appreciate all the choices that I made, but I do appreciate that I made some really great friends and I learned how to do events during that time. I learned how to network during that time. Like there were so many things that I learned that year when I was, by all accounts, kind of a mess. And yet still there was all this beautiful work that came. I would say that was my first experience with therapy. And because that therapist then was moving off campus and I couldn't afford to go to her anymore, I just didn't go anymore after that until you were 2. And then I just went to survive winning a car. So I was in Mary Kay and I only went to therapy long enough to just survive that goal. And it wasn't until Josh was 9 months old that I actually finally decided. I think that's when I would say when I decided was when I call it a nervous breakdown. It feels like I didn't stop crying for 2 weeks, hardly showered during that time, and then finally ended up in therapy to actually kind of make my way through the healing process.
If you didn't bring up that time when I was 2, I was going to ask about it to say,
Yeah.
Would you say that is also another time that sort of spurred things on instead
Yeah.
of?
So I love to think about journeys as like you are going along in a train. And the only reason I think a train, like in some ways, when we're talking about healing journeys, feels like a better metaphor is because inertia keeps you moving in the same direction, but there comes points where you come to like a switching yard, and it's very hard for trains to take a 90-degree turn. They have to take a much more gentle turn, and I think that is more like what humans do. And so I think about it like people that I meet are like switching yards where they just keep moving me like 1 degree difference, 1 degree difference. And so that those are kind of those moments, and we call them crossroads moments, but I don't really think that they're even a crossroads necessarily, because it's very rare that a human can actually make like a complete 90-degree turn. I think about people that make a profession of faith and can do some pretty radical change quickly, but beyond that, mostly we do a lot of 1% improvements. And so that therapist, I think he was also at the university, because Barry was a student, so I was able to go to that, use that resource. But he was like, I can remember him saying, I was something about something you had done at 2, and he goes, she's 2, what do you expect? And I'm like, I don't know what to expect. I have no idea. And so he said, you need a mom mentor, like somebody um, that will like let you watch them be a mom. And I was like, he goes, because you don't you might have had a couple of good examples, but you don't seem to remember them. And then the other examples were terrible. So you just need like a new strategy. And I was like, that is so dumb. What in the world? Like and there was a gal from church who had one day when you were like 9 months old, I had walked out of church crying and she ended up praying for me and she ended up like just really pursuing me and trying to be my friend. And I thought she was so holy and amazing because she sang on church on stage. And so I was really scared to be her friend because I was really afraid she would think that I was just this horrible person. And so, but we've talked enough that I would be like, hey, yeah, so I went to therapy. Here's how it's going. So we had developed enough of a friendship. And I said, can you believe this guy? Like, what a dumb idea. And she goes, I would be your mom mentor. And I go, you would? Like I should be thinking, really? Why would you do that? Why would you? It's so funny to me now because I'm such a huge believer in like pouring into people and mentoring people. But I'm telling you, like, so I would have been like 23-year-old me was like, what in the world? Who's going to do this?
So, but I think that makes sense. Knowing what I know about your history, of course you would think, why would somebody like sacrifice their time just to help me? Like if you want something in this world, you've got to do it on your own. You've got
Yeah.
to make it happen. There aren't other people there to help you. Why would somebody, that's so silly. Not like that somebody would take time just to let me watch them be a mom. Of course that would be weird. And I think that now with all of the experience you have, you think, of course, people would let you like into their life and to just live life with them. Like, and you model that so well. And anyway, we can validate that it probably makes sense that you thought that's so
Well,
crazy.
and I also want to say that anybody else that thinks it's weird to ask for a mentor or weird to ask somebody to coffee, then I thought it was weird too, but do it anyway.
Right.
So, and I tease her all the time. And if you follow the podcast or you're my Facebook friend, you know that I'm talking about my friend Paula. And so here we are now. What, you'll be 29 next month, so 27 years later. And I tease her and say, I guess you didn't know you were signing up for a lifelong commitment. And she's like, well, I mean, I was willing to, if that's what it came to. It's interesting because she also, around that same time, she adopted someone um, she was like a daughter to them. And so we had very parallel journeys of people that she was loving on. So she has been an amazing, amazing model for me. And I can't imagine where my life would be without that critical and I can remember when I walked out of church crying and she was standing back there waiting to go on stage to sing a special at the end of the song or at the end of the service. And I think, oh my goodness, how God had to orchestrate that for our paths to cross at that moment. And then now, like, I mean, I can't even, I don't even want to imagine another life without
Well,
having
I was
had
like
that. So.
to bring it light for a second. I can't imagine Christmas without cookies from Paula's house. So
Yeah, well,
thanks
and
for
I mean,
crying
recently,
27 years ago.
even you've had the opportunity because your
Yeah.
in-laws, down, I think we've talked about it on the podcast of like, or somewhere anyway, but that she, yeah, has continued to pour into my kids. And anyway, so that's a beautiful thing.
So my next question, just sort of to keep us moving, because we could, go through all of the timeline of everything. So you decided to go on a journey, decided you wanted something different. What things probably most impacted you? And I want to, I'm thinking broadly, things that impacted you from then to about now when it comes to like conferences, books,
Mm,
this teacher, this like,
sure.
are there things that you're like, this person, like, or this thing that I went to and did
Yeah.
that impacted me getting here?
I do want to kind of just step one quick step forward, because one of those people was my third I won't say final therapist, but he was the one that when I had decided to actually heal, the mighty Joe Young, he is probably the one that taught me the most about working with your younger version of yourself, because he would literally, I would show up to my appointment, and he would say, okay, we're going to talk to little 8-year-old on the porch swing, because after my mom's funeral, I had this very vivid memory of sitting on my grandma's porch swing and sitting there wondering what I was going to do now. And a bunch of people from my family, they knew it was my birthday, so people were giving me money for my birthday. And I made so many decisions. I think that also, if I look at Traveling Light and I talk about how people made decisions, their younger version themselves, I don't know that I've talked about how the way I learned that was actually because 8-year-old me took the driver's seat. And 8-year-old me was like, okay, dad left a few months ago, mom just left. I can't trust anybody. I have to do this all on my own. There's nobody else that I can depend on. I have to make my way through here. I mean, it's a whole lot of like, just he just used to talk.
Abandonment issues.
Oh, big time. And so many, I'm trying to think of other decisions besides I can't trust people and I have to take care of everything myself. And 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 what's interesting is that in my book, I talk about the idea that, like, you may not realize you made those decisions. And until I went through therapy, I certainly didn't realize that I made those decisions. But going through that therapy when I was 24, 20, 25, I think. Yeah, I was 25 when that happened. I mean, put me on a different trajectory of my life. And so that was critical. And then when I finished therapy, I was working at a job. I call it a cow job, because I was just like, I could show up and do the job without a lot of thought, and I didn't have to have passion for it. I needed to heal. And so I just got a job that I could show up and do the work. And in the middle of one day, I was thinking, if I could do anything on the planet, what would I want to do? And so I'm like, by now, like 26, I think. And I was like, oh, I would love to work for Zig Ziglar. He is, motivational speaker, and he had people that work for him that go around and do trainings and talks. I'm like, man, that would be great. And 2 weeks later, I get this email that is like, Jack Canfield is having a 10-day workshop that you could learn how to facilitate self-esteem skills. And I was pregnant, and we decided that this would be a great idea for me to go pregnant 10 days to California, Santa Barbara, California. And I wasn't pregnant enough that you could tell. So a lot of people didn't know in the beginning of the week that I was pregnant. And I mean, that revolutionized my life, because one of the things that was so critical, and by having 10 days there, you had to work through your own stuff. And like, basically Jack Canfield's rule was, you can't lead anybody through an exercise if you haven't experienced it and you haven't worked through your stuff with this exercise. And so he took us through this huge amount of exercise. I mean, this huge number in 10 days of exercises. And I like vivid memories where I can just pull up right now of somebody like shaking me and saying, like, I don't care what you were doing, what you were wearing, anything. It is not okay for anybody to touch you without your permission. Period. The end. And I, at that point, was still blaming myself for a lot of the sexual abuse that had happened to me. Like, it was my fault, all of those sort of things. I must have been doing something. I would see a picture of myself in that time frame and be like, well, of course you were wearing that. Of course that happened to you, And so many of that was that training. And I would say that put me on a path of really about personal development. And remember, at this point, I'd already done Mary Kay. I'd been teaching classes in Mary Kay about this. I had gone to plenty of workshops and plenty of seminars in Mary Kay. So I guess I was cultivating that idea from I don't know. Like I'm sitting there going, like, I don't know, maybe Mary Kay put it in me. Maybe Mary Kay, I was attracted to Mary Kay because that was in there. I'm not really sure. But recently when I decided to get life coach certified, I was like, what if I'm just not, what if I don't really apply this? And Perry's like, when did you start studying personal development? And I was like, 27 years ago. And he's like, I don't think you're going to quit. I think this is really legitimately what your life's work is. And I'm like, oh, okay. Thanks. So that was important. More recently, the book Soundtracks by John Acuff is been very impactful. It is a very different way to think about the thoughts that you have in your brain. His new book, All It Takes Is a Goal, is coming out in September, and my story of building up the Be Freaking Awesome podcast is actually in that book. So John Acuff has had a big impact on my journey. Loving What Is by Byron Katie was a book that I have continuously referred to. In Be Freaking Awesome, I have a list. It's very interesting because I have a list of books that I read, and I often will discount the value of Be Freaking Awesome book because I'm like, oh, well, if you read all the books I read, all it is my story and a summary of the books that I'd read, which I'm not, that is what it is. That's the way I think about it. Someday I'll think about it differently. I used to hate the book, so, this is an improvement. This book, Traveling Light, I feel like has there's no listing in the back of the books that I've read. And that's not to say that I haven't, and I haven't done a lot of research, and I quote a lot of books in the book, but it really has kind of transformed this experience to being not just me regurgitating other people's information, but actually taking this and synthesizing it into a new way. What is that thing we talk about? The taxonomy?
Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah.
I have reached the pinnacle of Bloom's taxonomy. All the things that I've learned. That's not to say I've reached the pinnacle of learning, but that I now have such a deep knowledge of this stuff that I can synthesize it and put it out for everyone else. So
I love that. Okay, so we talked about when you sort of made some decisions. We've talked about what authors, workshops, people have kind of influenced the journey. You talked a little bit already about your childhood, but I just wanted to highlight and give you the opportunity. Are there significant moments from your childhood that I think that brought you here as well? Maybe wanting to write, maybe wanting to talk and share things with people. I don't know. What impacted you? Do you want to share here?
Yes. So the opening story of the book talks about, my trip to India, and my editor tweaked the story in probably about the fourth or fifth paragraph, where it says something along the lines of like, you may not have experienced going to bed hungry or whatever, but and in the original manuscript, that is me telling the story of when I was 5 years old. I have, with all of the different types of conferences, workshops, meditation, coaches, all the things I've had, I've explored extensively younger versions of myself. And 5-year-old me is absolutely, positively the most, she's the version of me that decided she wanted to speak up for people that couldn't speak up for themselves. And I have vivid memories of laying in bed and going, I'm hungry. There's literally nothing in this trailer to eat, and being really annoyed with the adults in my life. And so at different points in my life, I have had to go and sit and talk to her. The story that I share later in 8 or 9, she's the one that is kind of the facilitator of that story, that says, let me introduce you to people that, had a lot of loss. And so I would say the who I am is most like 5-year-old me. I was recently visiting with a friend and we were talking about the idea that most of us, if we can tune back into what we loved doing between 3 and 6 years old, it's actually a good indicator of what we'll enjoy doing for the rest of our life. And not to say that at 5 years old, I could speak up, but I already had that seed planted. And he pointed out, that even in marketing, you've owned a marketing agency for 15 years. Like, even that is giving a voice to people. When you do a logo, because I had been lamenting that a logo didn't work out. And he was like, even when you do a logo, you're trying to help somebody, their voice be elevated. And I was like, oh my gosh, Toastmasters is about elevating your voice, right? This is about giving you a voice in your own life. And so that's probably the most critical, is that 5-year-old version of me. I also want to encourage people because, number one, you don't have to spend 27 years doing this. I think that's the beautiful thing about having a guide or a coach, is that I've navigated my way through this forest of pain and fear, and I can give you some shortcuts of how to get there. So don't think that, I don't want anybody to be discouraged that they think it's going to take a 27-year journey for them. But you do have to start. And I say that, you have to decide where you want to go. At some point, you do have to kind of pick where you're headed. And there's a part of the Traveling Light that I talk about the idea of, if you can't quite figure out what you want, you can make a list of things you don't want. Like, I don't want to be somebody that is triggered all the time. I don't want to be somebody who is scared all the time. I don't want to be somebody. That's okay. It's totally a viable method of deciding. I didn't want to be hungry and voiceless. And that is how I found, what ended up being this life's work that I've done.
I like that. Okay, so we talked about what from your childhood impacted the journey. We've kind of covered this a little bit, but when you think about being a parent, which is a big part of your life, even though I would say it is not like the only thing in your life. So basically, what from that time period has sort of impacted or season, lifestyle? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think you get it.
Yeah.
What from that has impacted you and brought you here to this moment?
Yeah. One of the things that I was able to do, well, I've seen this in a lot of people that have survived a lot of trauma. We discount what happened to us because we're like, I don't know, I survived it. It's fine. It's fine. What are we supposed to do? Cry about it? What are we supposed to do? Wallow in it? Like, those of us that have survived some really horrible, heinous things, we are pretty fanatical about, we ain't going back there. And when we do that, we actually are abandoning ourselves, and we're actually telling ourselves, suck it up, buttercup. We're telling ourselves it wasn't that big of a deal. And so being a parent actually helped me to see what was more typical for someone who wasn't experiencing a lot of trauma. And so I think I share in the book the fact that I turned 29 the same year you turned 8, which is the year my mom died. She was 29 and I was 8. And so I was able to see what a typical, and I'm not going to say normal, but a typical 8-year-old that lived in a 2-parent family, pretty middle class lifestyle, not tons of trauma, normal childhood stuff, what her life was like. And so by viewing what your life was like, and even imagining what would it be like for Sammy if something happened to me. And that was totally a different shift in perspective. I also remember, and I think I don't journal a lot. So when I have something written in a journal, it's kind of a big deal. But I remember at that point that was the first time I had thought about what was it like for my mom to die, knowing that my adopted dad had already left, knowing that her sister was trying to like tell me that, hey, by the way, I'm the one that gave birth to you, like all of the turmoil that she was leaving me in. And I just had never really thought about that until that moment when I realized, like, whoa, that was a lot as a mom. It sucked. I didn't have memories of her for many years. And I used to think that's because life sucked. And I came to realize that my mind had buried those memories, the good memories, because it was too painful to miss how good it was, which was a
Mm.
very different. Sometimes we bury memories because it's too painful to remember how bad it was. But if it was really good and you lost something, then you can bury those. I also found that with even traumatic relationships, I didn't remember any good memories from my stepdad because it was buried underneath this trauma. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to address it. And now I'm able to appreciate even the skills that he has. I mean, last year was on a road trip and by myself, and it was cold and dark, and I got a flat tire and I was late. And I was like, oh, I'm really glad that my stepdad taught me how to change a tire. And it's no big deal. I'm on I-40 and I could call AAA. I had AAA at the time, but I could call AAA, but I can change it. And I was back on the road in like 25 minutes. And I was just flooded with gratitude that he had taught me something that I could then use. And so when I raised my kids, I made sure that they could change a flat tire. I did better with the first two than the third. But anyway, so even that little thing, like he taught me that, and he's the reason why I'm such a fanatical voter. He believed that was really important for us to vote. And so I would say that the things that I learned were a way for me to appreciate my own experience. It was a way for me to stop discounting my own hard things that happened and just to pause and be like, oh, wow, that did suck. That was hard. I see you, 8-year-old me. Golly, you sat there and thought you were alone. And then to just be able to imagine being there and not abandoning her anymore. I think that's what I learned. Now, as a grandparent, I'm learning even another level, which is then how to reparent myself, how to be more gentle and more kind. So many layers of that, which is why I think legacy is so important. And anyway.
I like it. One of my last questions, or maybe last one, we'll see where this goes. What jobs or work in your life have influenced and impacted you and brought you to this point?
Well, I would say being a Mary Kay sales consultant, we used to joke and say everybody should do at least 2 years, be in Mary Kay for at least 2 years because it's like finishing school. I wouldn't know how to wear makeup. And because back when I was coming up, there was not YouTube. So I didn't have anybody to teach me. Okay. I wouldn't have known how to wear an appropriate amount of jewelry and how to dress correctly and get my hair done and all of those things. So that it was finishing school for me to be able to like learn how to go from poverty to existing in business society. I would say that is probably one of the most critical. We also had to, I did so many trainings on personality styles, sales techniques, persuasion. Over a course of 3 to 4 year period, not only did I take a lot of trainings, but I gave a lot of trainings. And when you give the trainings, then you have to learn it at a deeper level. So I would say probably one of the most impactful. I did catering in college. So there are many times when I put together parties that it is super fun because I'm just using some of those skill sets that I learned. I I think owning my own business for so many years has allowed me to just continue to kind of morph and evolve as a person, getting to know other people's businesses and kind of how they run their business. I get to learn a whole lot about how things can work and how things are done. And so those are probably the three key ones that I would say. I mean, I love to tell the story that when I was in high school, one of my jobs, I was a janitor. It was the Give Poor Kids a Job program, whatever JTPA stood for. Anyway, and so I learned to, run a floor buffer. I have scars literally from a lot of fun times that we had. I did that for 2 summers, and that job, while I don't know that it applies to me now, I did teach me the value of hard work, and I had a really fantastic supervisor who just loved us so well. And I got to be a supervisor because I was 17 when I did the 1 summer. So anyway, so there's lots of jobs. I think any job you've had probably contributes. I tell people all the time, if you worked at Sonic, then you probably learned people skills, you learned dealing with difficult people. I did work at Sonic. I was a server in high school. So lots of serving types of jobs where I got to work with people a lot. And I think I talk enough about my experience at the housing authority in the book that I don't want to talk about that one today. So
That's okay.
yeah.
What I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how we close this up in conclusion, because I think this has been it's a little bit different episode than what we normally do. We don't, normally we dive into topics and subject matters, but I do think it's important to take some time to reflect. And
Yeah.
I appreciate, and I hope others do as well, you modeling that for us in this episode. And so while it may not be that we, did a deep dive at any particular topic, you modeling what it's like to kind of reflect back on different things that have happened and how it has brought you here, I think can be really helpful.
I would say that the reason why I tell stories is sometimes people are like, what's the point of that story? And I think a couple of things. Number one, Jesus taught in parables. And so I feel like he's the best example of a human. And so he teaches, and he didn't always say, so here's the lesson that you're supposed to learn. And so I think telling the stories, what I hope people get out of this episode is that they're like, oh, that triggers a memory for them. It creates a scenario where, oh, I've had that thought, I've had that experience, I'm not alone. I would say mostly I tell my stories and share things like this to be able to, so that people don't feel alone in their journey. And also to be real, because in like a week or so ago, my brain offered me the sweet, sweet thought when I woke up, why can't you just get your crap together? And then a little while later, my brain offered me the thought, well, you're the one that positioned, I can't remember, did I say this last week's episode? I'm so sorry if I did. You're the one that positioned yourself as somebody who does have their crap together. And so that's not how I want to position myself. I want to position myself as somebody who is also still on the journey. I say the reason why I'm an awesome coach for people is because I've been there, done that. I'm still on my journey. I do not come from a place of let me crawl up on the pedestal. It is absolutely like, oh yeah, there are very few things that could happen to people that I don't go like, yep, bought that t-shirt. Yep, that one's in tatters. Yep, that one's in the wash. Yep, I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. And so hopefully people feel less alone, and people feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't start out with nearly that tragic of a circumstance. Surely I can improve. I can evolve. I can go on this journey. Even if it feels overwhelming, I could still go on this journey.
I think that's so great. Any last thoughts on how you got here and what you're doing here? We'll talk soon about where we're going. We've been talking about where we're going for a while, and we'll keep, pointing more towards that. But it's also important to say, how'd we get here?
I was interviewed by someone else and they asked me, what is the best decade of your life? And
Ooh.
I know, I thought it was a great question. And I said, my 50s. And I said, I just turned 50. So I I'm forever in the grateful for where I am and just cheerful anticipation that it's just going to continue to get better. And that is not to say that bad things don't happen. Like, good grief, last summer, within a 3-week period, I had to, go back to work full time. My basement flooded and my beloved cat died. My definitely have, challenges in life. And I'm just, I'm very glad to have such a full toolbox to be able to deal with any of the things that come up. So when the challenges of life come up, we have a toolbox. And if the only thing in your toolbox is a hammer, then you're just going to walk around beating people up with it. And so what I love is that my toolbox is now very full and very nuanced. And sometimes I need a drill, and sometimes I need a screwdriver, and sometimes I need a machete. And so this journey is about picking up tools for that toolbox to be able to more effectively design the life that you want.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and for letting us get to be on the journey with you at times. People can still pre-order the book or just order it, depending on when you're listening, if you're listening within after 2 weeks from now. And thank you guys for being here and for being here, whether it's been one episode or 83 episodes. Thank you for joining us on the journey. And I hope you guys go and be freaking awesome.